Hello. I know I'm the last speaker before lunch, so can everyone get up and wiggle your hands around and do that? No, only joking. So I'm here to talk about smart water use to support livability. This is just some work that we're doing in SA Water to actually get the practical evidence to demonstrate that we can use water in different ways for different purposes. Oh shit, so this is the thing that goes wrong. There we go, I'm not going to use it. Okay, we all know water is important to bathe, to clean ourselves, for drinking, for cooking. It's a pretty important part of our lives. It's also fairly important for productivity, for us to grow food and to grow the state. It's quite valuable. But most importantly, it underpins the soul of where we want to live. A place without water is just a desert, I suppose. That's probably true. But it's just, it doesn't have any soul. There's no purpose to it. What we're now looking at is how we can use water to start to build more resilient communities and mitigate some of the impacts of climate change into the future. So some work has been done at Monash University to look at the vulnerability of different communities, and the column A, or area A, is basically a vulnerability index based on socioeconomic conditions, and also the buildings, whether they're double brick or single brick and that sort of thing. So the red being quite bad. In the B image, they're the hospital admissions that occur during heat events. So that's, the red are 10 people every 10,000 people are actually being admitted to hospital on those hot days. So there's quite a wealth of information about the vulnerability of our suburbs and what actually triggers that vulnerability. We also know when we're going to get heat stress, at what temperature we start to cause heat stress, and at what temperature people start to die. And it's a pretty sad thing that we actually know this, we've got this information, yet we're not actually doing a lot about it. This research that was done at Monash University shows that when you get above a certain temperature, and it's 42 degrees as a maximum temperature in Adelaide, or 32 as the average temperature over the 24 hours, that the death rate starts to increase by 2 to 8%, and the hospital admissions goes up by 25%. Now that's a huge impact on our health budget and also on people's health, their personal health. So we need to address this. Now we've talked earlier and there's been a lot of conversation about the benefits of green infrastructure and how it can cool the environment. Parks are a great place to recreate, to cool the area around it, but also for heat refuge, I suppose. And the cooling is because of two functions. It's evaporation and transpiration. Without water, these don't happen. So water is really important to have in our parks. You can have a park, but there's no point in that park being there if it's a dry park. And I'll just demonstrate this with some thermal imaging. This is a road at about 10 o'clock in the morning on a hot day. The road is actually cooler than the dead grass and the bare earth next to it. That road's about 25 degrees, the bare earth is about 40 degrees. That's the surface temperature. It's not intuitive. You just think that, a big black road, although it's greyish, but a road would be a lot hotter than the bare earth and the dead grass around it, but it's not the case. And then this is using the same technique. Bare earth on that verge is the same temperature as the road. This is about 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon on a 35-degree day. Those temperatures are around about 50 degrees for the surface temperature. It's interesting when you reflect back on some of the things that we did during the drought about browning off the parks. I think what we actually did was increase the temperature because we were actually creating these hot spots instead of actually cooling them down. So we're starting to look at this the message is, I work for SA Water, I could be out here saying, water everything. But that's not the case. We're not trying to sell more water. What we're trying to say is, it's all about when and where you use your water. It's not about using more water, it's actually about using less water, but using it more tactfully and smarter. So we've started to devise this methodology, I suppose, of deep watering versus flash watering. Now, your deep watering is the big soaking that you give your lawn maybe once a week or twice a week in a really hot period, versus the flash watering that you'll do just to keep things alive. And I'll go into a bit more detail on that as I go through. But it really stems from the work that we've been doing. There's a lot of literature out there talking about the benefits of irrigation. And we've put this to its test down at Adelaide Airport, where we're irrigating a 4-hectare area to see if we can actually cool the air down. We're irrigating at night. We're not irrigating during the day and then seeing a temperature difference during that day. We're irrigating at night and we're seeing a temperature difference of 3 or 4 degrees, and I'll get onto that, for 3 or 4 days afterwards. So it's not, it's really about sustainable irrigation at night when you've got low evaporation rates. Here's some actual data. So the dots indicate the lines on that graph there. So you've got upwind in the irrigation area and the downwind. And what we're finding, and this has happened regularly, is that we get a 2, 3, 4 degree temperature difference within the irrigation area compared to the area outside of the irrigation area. The problem with our experiment is it's only on a 4-hectare site, so it's only fairly small, and as soon as that cooler air gets outside of that irrigation area, it's just overcome by that hot sort of bare earth that's outside of it. The interesting thing is with this, and this is just a bit of a side note, is that we talk about urban greening, and there's a lot of discussion about canopy cover, but it's really the grass and the soil that's cooling the air, and it's the trees that allow that cooler air to move away from that irrigation area. So grass on its own is good, trees on their own are good, but the combination of the two, it's just so much bigger than the sum of the parts. Taking this to another scale, this isn't actual data, this is just a hypothetical, but irrigating of that green open space, you can start to cool the areas around it quite dramatically. There's a rule of thumb that the irrigation area that you have, you'll see the cooling that occurs from that outside of that at about the same distance as your irrigation area. So if it's 100 metres wide, you'll see cooling occur 100 metres downwind. Now we're not seeing that all the time, particularly where there's bare earth or hot infrastructure around it. But the importance of this graphic is really that you can start to get some real regional cooling or precinct cooling, but it's not just the open space that plays a part in this and the irrigation of the open space, it's your private space as well. It's all got to combine to actually have this overall cooling effect. So you take the microclimate into something a bit more than micro. We've been experimenting with how we can do this and not use more water. So we've got a small trial going at the moment where we're using soil moisture probes, smart meters, and linked up with some clever agricultural software. And this agricultural software is linked to the Bureau of Met site, and it tells you, pretty much what's going to happen over the next week. So it does forecasting, it also does backcasting, so it can tell you when you should be irrigating, looks at your soil moisture, models where it should be, models where it is, shows where it is, and then tells you what's coming over the next week and when you need to water. Now, it's a really simple thing, and I've got a farming background, and it's something that you always do in agriculture, you water before the heat wave comes. But I'll get onto that in a minute. But we're not doing that so much in the urban context. The other interesting thing that it does is it tells you the top line up there is the wettest part of the soil profile. It's also the deepest part of the soil profile, well below where the roots are. So that's wasted water. That's just going into the groundwater now. So by being able to work out where you're dry within your soil profile, you can start to tailor your watering for that. Now, that's probably a bit too much information for your average gardener, your average homeowner. So we're looking now at having a series of these soil moisture probes around the city. We've got a few already. And then you can use them as reference sites. So we're envisaging that in the future you'd have this reference site and you'd start to look at the conditions in your area and work out when you need to irrigate. And then link that with some satellite data as well, so you can see soil moisture. Now this is getting into the real data, and I've got 2 minutes, so I better hurry. This is water use in the red versus, temperature in the red versus water use. So I've taken that little section in the middle and said, okay, the red line is the actual of water use, but what if we were to irrigate as per that software is telling us, using the same amount of water over that period of time, but we've got less peaks and less troughs. So the beauty of that is, from a utilities perspective, both water and energy utility, we're not designing our infrastructure for those peaks that happen a few times a year, and they cost about 30% of the capital, so tens of millions of dollars. You're also not operating on those really hot days and spending a lot of money on energy when we don't have a lot of energy in the system on those really hot days. So it's just a way to smooth that out. So I've put this to the test at home. This is my backyard on a 35-degree day, and this is flash watering. So this is now what you do on a heat wave day. Temperature was around about 45 degrees for that surface temperature. 1 minute of watering, it's now 25 degrees. Now that then heats up in 10 or 15 minutes after that, but 1 minute of watering and you can get that difference in surface temperature. So I took this to the next level and thought, okay, well what about, you want to be outside entertaining. We were having a barbecue one day, my wife's saying, oh, it's too hot to be outside, 37 degrees. So I watered for 1 minute that grapevine, just got out there and sprayed it. And then I measured the air temperature. It pretty much dropped by 6 degrees, and then over the preceding half hour climbed back up again. The interesting part about that, and we could have our barbecue outside, instead of sitting inside with an air conditioner on, with the lights on, possibly with the TV or the radio or something on like that. So when you look at the price comparison, we spent 6 cents for that half hour versus 30 cents using an air conditioner in a system where we have limited capacity in our energy system. So the message here is, when you get home in the afternoon on a really hot day, don't let your kids sit in front of the TV with the air conditioner on, glazed over. Get them out, turn the sprinkler on for 5 minutes, and that's not a sprinkler on high, that's on a sprinkler on low. You're saving a lot more money by doing that than sitting inside. And finally, this is just, pictures tell 1,000 words. This is looking out again at that dry verge and dry place next door, and this is looking the other way. And I know where I'd prefer to live, and I do, because that's my house. Thank you.